Good evening, everyone. We will begin at 4:30 sharp. There are 5 minutes left.
Good evening, everyone. We regret to announce that Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha will be unable to join the discussion today as he is keeping unwell. We are grateful to Commander Abhijit Sinha, retired, for accepting our invite to join in the discussion. I now request our Vice Principal, Professor Sandhya Garg, to deliver the welcome address. Professor Sandhya Garg.
नमस्कार। आजादी न केवल मनुष्यों का बल्कि पशु पक्षियों का भी एक स्वप्न होती है और हम सभी भारतवासी अपने आप में बहुत सौभाग्यशाली हैं कि इस वर्ष हम आजादी का अमृत महोत्सव मना रहे हैं। इस उपलक्ष्य में गणतंत्र दिवस की पूर्व संध्या पर जानकी देवी मेमोरियल कॉलेज की आंतरिक गुणवत्ता आश्वासन प्रकोष्ठ, इंटरनल क्वालिटी एश्योरेंस सेल तथा राष्ट्रीय कैडेट कोर द्वारा आयोजित इस पैनल डिस्कशन में मैं आप सभी का स्वागत करती हूँ। आज का विषय है सशस्त्र बलों के परिप्रेक्ष्य में भारत एक प्रजातांत्रिक गणतंत्र, इंडिया एज अ डेमोक्रेटिक रिपब्लिक एंड आर्म्ड फोर्सेस पर्सपेक्टिव। मुझे आप सभी से आज के सम्मानित सदस्यों को परिचित कराते हुए गर्व व प्रसन्नता की अनुभूति हो रही है। सर्वप्रथम एयर मार्शल दीप्तेंदु चौधरी, रिटायर्ड, एवीएसएम, वीएम, वीएसएम। हमारे दूसरे अतिथि मेजर जनरल डॉक्टर विपिन बख्शी, रिटायर्ड, एवीएसएम, वीएसएम तथा कमांडर अभिजीत सिन्हा, रिटायर्ड। मैं जानकी देवी मेमोरियल कॉलेज परिवार की ओर से आप सभी का स्वागत करती हूँ और अपनी प्राचार्य प्रोफेसर स्वाति पाल का भी हम सभी उपस्थित सदस्यों की ओर से हृदय से स्वागत करती हूँ। इस कार्यक्रम का प्रारंभ हम दीप प्रज्वलन से करेंगे। दीप जो कि आशा, उत्साह, जीवन और प्रकाश का प्रतीक है। दीप प्रज्वलन के लिए मैं आमंत्रित करती हूँ हमारी टेक्निकल टीम को।
धीरे ना धीरे ना, नित्तोम तनना धीरे ना धीरे ना, नित्तोम
धन्यवाद। अब मैं आमंत्रित करती हूँ राष्ट्रीय कैडेट कोर की इंचार्ज डॉक्टर देवाहुति को कि वे आज के अतिथियों का एक संक्षिप्त परिचय सभी सदस्यों को दें। डॉक्टर देवाहुति।
It's my honor to introduce our esteemed panelist, Air Marshal Diptendu Chaudhary, retired, AVSM, VM, CSM. He is an alumnus of the Royal College of Defence Studies, UK, and completed his Masters from King's College, London. He is currently pursuing PhD on air power. He is an experienced fighter pilot who has commanded several combat units and has been actively involved in air operations at strategic, operational, tactical levels, policy formulation, and strategy development. He has led the IAF in 3 international air exercises with the US, France, and UAE. He retired as the commandant of National Defense College, Delhi. He is an avid air power scholar, writer, and speaker on strategy, air power, and security matters. We welcome you, sir. Our next guest for the day, Major General Dr. Retired Bipin Bakshi, AVSM, VSM. He joined the para engineers on commissioning from IMA in 1982, where he won the Sword of Honor and Gold Medal. He is a recipient of VSM for his service in the Kargil sector during Operation Parakram as CEO of an engineer regiment, and the unit was awarded the Army Commander's Unit Appreciation under his command in January 2004. He has served in the UNO as a staff officer in Angola during UNIVIM 3 and has been an instructor in VIO's Wing College of Military Engineering, School or Artillery, Deolali, and IG training of NSG Manesar. He commanded of an infantry brigade on the northern border and an infantry division on the western border, as well as important staff appointment 4 times in Jammu and Kashmir sector. He was awarded the DG NSG Commendation Card 2018 for his tenure in the NSG, where he had the added responsibility of running the National Bomb Data Center and of Station Commander, Manesar Garrison. As a DG NCC of Northeastern region, he pioneered the first ever Brahmaputra sailing expedition, earning a mention in the Limca Book of Records 2019. He has published 2 graphic novels on war heroes. We welcome you, sir. Our next panelist for the day, Commander Abhijit Sinha, retired, an alumnus of Indian Naval Academy, served in the Naval Aviation Branch of Indian Navy for over 22 years prior to taking premature retirement. He is qualified aerospace engineer from Indian Institute of Science, Bengaluru. He has served on various ships, including aircraft carriers, and headed few of the most prestigious projects of the Indian Navy. He is the recipient of several prestigious awards, including 2 Chief of Naval Staff Commendation Cards, and has presented papers in the international aerospace seminars in US and Europe. After taking premature retirement from the Navy, he joined as a Japanese multinational company in 2012 and went on to become its director and CEO. He is a registered member of Aerospace and Defense Consultants of India and is a resident consultant with many multinational companies. He also takes visiting lectures in management institutes, including IIM Joka, Kolkata, on the subject of life cycle costing in aviation. We are proud to have him as a member of the Internal Quality Assurance Cell of the college. We welcome you, sir. I am extremely happy to welcome our principal, Professor Swati Pal. She is a Charles Wallace Scholar, the first Asian to receive the John McGraw Theatre Studies Scholarship at Edinburgh University. She has authored several books on theatre, creative, and academic writing. She is the Vice President of Indian Association for Commonwealth Literature and Language Studies, ICLAS, an executive body member of the Indian Association for the Study of Australia, ISA. She has presented a number of papers in both national and international conferences. She is a translator and a poet. She has been a recipient of several awards. An able administrator under whose dynamic leadership the college is creating newer benchmarks for itself and touching new heights day by day. Thank you, ma'am, for always guiding us, motivating us, and leading us to paths of excellence. I now invite Professor Pal to welcome our distinguished guest and make the opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Debahuti. Air Marshal Diptendu Chaudhary, Major General Bipin Bakshi, Commander Abhijit Sinha, members of the governing body of the college, faculty members, non-teaching staff, beloved students, and friends. It is my pleasure and privilege to welcome our distinguished speakers to the panel discussion on India as a democratic republic and armed forces perspective. I am so grateful that our speakers readily consented to share their views with us on this forum. As someone with an armed forces background, it has always been interesting for me to see the interface between the military and the civilian ways of life. Sometimes similar, but often extremely different. One thing, of course, that ties us together is our love for our country. We don't necessarily have to be armed forces personnel to be patriotic or to love and serve the nation. However, each of us plays a special role, as do the armed forces. When India got independence, it inherited an imperial military, which was felt, given its structure, its recruitment on caste and religious basis, would be incompatible with India's aspiration for a new secular country. India has preserved and consolidated its democracy and has kept the military out of politics. Many Western thinkers have been surprised with this outcome, not to discount our own skeptics. One can unhesitatingly say that the military in India is safe for democracy, or to put it differently, the military is not a threat to democracy. The military and Indian democracy are unique, especially when you look around the neighborhood with much the same colonial heritage, which has witnessed coups and military juntas. The 2nd century Roman poet Decimus Junius Juvenalis or Juvenal has raised a famous question. I can't speak Latin, so I will speak it in English. Who will guard the guards, or who will watch the watchmen? Our armed forces and military leaders answer that comprehensively through the adherence and respect of the Constitution, civilian authority, and the rule of law. In the light of this, can we say that the armed forces is a pillar of India's democracy? I'm sure that the 3 speakers today from the Air Force, the Army, and the Navy will, through their perspectives, throw light on this question of mine in their own way. I once more welcome our very eminent panelists and all in the audience for what I'm sure will be a very stimulating discussion. I request Professor Garg and Dr. Brahmachari to take the program forward. Thank you.
धन्यवाद प्रोफेसर पाल आपके प्रेरणादायक शब्दों के लिए। मैं अब इस सत्र के फॉर्मेट से आप सभी को परिचित करा देती हूँ। पैनल में उपस्थित हमारे वक्ता महोदय प्रत्येक 10 से 12 मिनट के बीच अपना वक्तव्य रखेंगे। सभी वक्ता महोदय के वक्तव्य के बाद हम एक प्रश्नोत्तर सत्र आयोजित करेंगे, जिसका संचालन हमारी प्राचार्य प्रोफेसर स्वाति पाल करेंगी। आप सभी जब वक्तव्य चल रहा है तो अपने प्रश्न उत्तर चैट बॉक्स में सीधे प्रोफेसर स्वाति पाल को भेज सकते हैं और आपके प्रश्नों को प्रोफेसर पाल ही हमारे वक्ताओं के समक्ष रखेंगी। आपकी जो भी जिज्ञासाएं हैं वो आप चैट बॉक्स में जरूर अपनी जिज्ञासाएं चैट बॉक्स में भेज दें। अब मैं आज के इस सत्र का विधिवत प्रारंभ करते हुए हमारे प्रथम वक्ता, आज के पैनल के प्रथम वक्ता जो हमारे हैं एयर मार्शल दीप्तेंदु चौधरी, रिटायर्ड एवीएसएम, बीएम, वीएसएम। मैं आपको आमंत्रित करती हूँ कि आज के प्रस्तावित विषय पर आप अपने विचार रखें। एयर मार्शल दीप्तेंदु चौधरी।
Thank you very much. At the outset, Dr. Swati Pal, Principal Janki Devi Memorial College, Professor Sandhya Garg, Dr. Shilpa Chaudhary, Dr. Devahuti Brahmachari, fellow panelists, faculty, students, and NCC cadets, and all members in the audience who are online today. It's indeed a pleasure and privilege to be able to sort of speak, to be able to talk and across sitting in my house in Pune to such a vast audience. And this is something technology has enabled us in the last couple of years. So interestingly and amazingly empowering us. And it's a wonderful occasion to have chosen. And I must say, I think after such an evocative lamp lighting session, I think it sort of set the pace for the event. And that was truly beautiful. I will not, as Professor Garg has mentioned, that we'll speak for 10 to 12 minutes. So I'll keep it short and to the point. And so the topic, you're all aware, and it's on India as a republic, as a democratic republic and armed forces perspective, and having been in the services for almost 38 years. We all look at, as very aptly mentioned by Dr. Paul, when she mentioned that and feelings about a nation is not the preserve of just the military and the defenders of the nation, but every citizen of the country. And we are all aware, democracy, in our Indian government, it's a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And we are the largest democracy in the world today, 1.4 billion people. And we are an immensely huge country, 3.3 million square kilometers, and that brings an entirely different perspective when we talk about the size of a democracy. Very interestingly, our democracy is not really a typical classical Western style democracy, and more, it's a non-Western and a native version of democracy, which is attuned, liberal, and very attuned to our Indian social mores and culture. And that is what makes us uniquely different. And that is why the world is more and more increasingly looking at India as an example. And we are a very a vibrant democracy. It's a nation which is multi-racial, multi-religious, multilingual, and it's immense in size. And as far as the armed forces are concerned, we are one of the largest armed forces in the world. And while each of the speakers subsequently will cover their perspective, but I'll just cover a few salient points from a broader point of view. And as Dr. Pal had mentioned right in the beginning, that we are firmly an armed forces, firmly under the civilian control. And that's the most important aspect of the character of our armed forces in this country. Armed forces are truly a reflection of India's vibrant and democratic ideals. The armed forces are multiracial, multilingual, multi-religious, and there is no difference whatsoever in my 38 years, and I'm sure the other speakers will watch for it, that within the services, it just does not matter which state you belong to, which religion you belong to, what language you speak, which part of the country do you come from, what is your caste, creed, just doesn't matter. We, in fact, in the armed forces, we pray to all the gods, to all the religions, and we celebrate all festivals together. And that's the unique character of the Indian armed forces. And the armed forces owe their loyalty to India, and it is symbolized in our case by the president, who is the commander-in-chief. And this relationship firmly separates the military from the state. And again, as Dr. Pal had mentioned, if you look around in the neighborhood and see, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, this is one country. There have been no coups, civil wars, no dictatorships, national disintegration. And it's amazing that how over the years we have grown stronger and stronger as a nation. And the armed forces, all together, that is the Army, Navy, and the Air Force, together form the military instrument of what we call national power. And or in today's terms, it's called the comprehensive national power, which actually is a sum total of all the resources of a nation, the natural resources and the social aspects which form together which essentially comprises of the economy, military, the internal security, social harmony, human capital, governance, knowledge, information, science and technology, geography, natural resources, foreign policy, diplomacy, and national will and leadership. So all this comprises of as what we call as comprehensive national power, and military is just one, but a key and a major instrument of this national power. So what is the role of the armed forces? The armed forces are here firmly to defend and safeguard the territory and the sovereignty of this nation. And primary role obviously is in times of war. And I will not go so much into the details of the wars that we have fought. And incidentally, we have fought 4 wars as a country, and a conflict that was from the beginning when we partition took place in 1947-48 Srinagar war, war for Kashmir, sorry, I beg your pardon. Then came the 1962, then came 1965, the Indo-Pak war, then 1971, the Indo-Pakistan war, which led to the liberation of Bangladesh. And in almost 20 years later, we had the Kargil war in 1999. And the very amazing aspect is in all these wars, the armed forces played a very important role. And while in the earlier years, we sort of, the Army and the Navy and the Air Force fought the militaries of other of our adversaries. But from 71 war onwards, the 3 services came together as a military instrument and led to the creation of Bangladesh and won the war. So, and in future, as we look at warfare and the way threats are there all around the world, this is going to be an increasingly challenging aspect, because today we find that the threats are so many, the challenges are multiplied. And once upon a time, it was the job of the military to defend the borders of a nation. And that was the covenant of the state, of the military to the state and its people. But today we find that the enemy is no longer defined at the borders. And in fact, the enemy has come into our cities, into our homes as well. And when you talk about comprehensive defense, it takes on an entirely different meaning and perspective in today. Earlier days, we fought large conventional wars. And today we find that in the world over, because economic progress is so important to every nation and its people, that no nation is really willing to go into a full-scale war of the kind we have seen historically in the past, because of the tremendous cost it tells on the nation and its people. And not to talk about the huge damage to the economy, like the 71 war put a 14-day war put our economy back to 10 years. And today, I just give a back of the envelope sort of an example that probably if you go for a war of that scale for 7 days, it'll put our economy back by 20 years. So truly, we can't really afford wars like that. So what happens? What is the threat scenario? So, but you all know the adversarial relationships which are there in our borders and with our neighbors. And so the war cannot be totally ruled out. So we all expect that wars of tomorrow will be short, swift, and probably localized. And so that brings the role of armed forces into a very unique character, where all 3 instruments, not only the Army, Air Force, and the Navy, will have to come together. They will have to integrate with all other aspects of comprehensive national power. That is the economy of the nation, the diplomacy. Everybody has to chip in and fight the battle and fight the war. So it's very important that today we stand united at this point in time, and with every progress of our democratic growth, this commitment gets stronger and stronger. I'm sure my other panelists will speak about their perspectives, and as Dr. Swati had mentioned, that if I could give an Air Force perspective of it, so I will switch now to the Air Force part of what it means to be a part of a democracy, and what role does the Air Force play in defending this democratic republic. So the wartime roles you're all aware of, we will not go too much into it, but I will quickly speak on something which is not too well known as the peacetime roles of the Air Force. In fact, I'll start off with the fact that most people tend to think that unlike the land and the sea, or the continental or the maritime domains, which has a clear geographical definition, which has a clear physical properties, that the air or the airspace domain does not happen. But that's not true. All physics students will be aware that air has very clear physical properties, and the airspace actually, by law of nations, has a geographical definition. That means sovereign airspace. That means like the border and the maritime domains, the airspace, India's airspace, is also clearly defined, like it is done in the world over. So one of the most important roles that the Air Force plays in peacetime is air defense, and that is defending this airspace. So this is a 24/7 into 365 days, year-on-year job of the IA. That means at any given point, and as we speak even now, there are radars, armed fighters, men on readiness, missile systems. They're all on readiness. That means at any given instant, is there any violation of airspace, our fighters scramble, they are picked up by the radars, the fighters are scrambled to intercept and this airspace violation. And whether they are civil military aircraft which have strayed from the path, or they are enemy or aircraft of our neighboring countries which have come very close to the border, or there's a possibility of their violating the border, or there are drones, or there are even balloons which have drifted, or large balloons which have drifted across the borders due to strong winds. They are intercepted and identified. And that's a role which we play throughout the year. And the other aspects which, when it comes to the hard power, or when you talk about hard power, the military aspect of the Air Force, which involves use of weapons, there are two other instances which I would like to mention. Is that one is the participation in the UN, United Nations, as a part of the UN Charter, where the Indian Air Force has played, taken part in many operations and many missions through the history of the United Nations. And air has been a very important part in it. Then in 1988, when there was a coup in the country of Maldives, the island country of Maldives, from the time we got the message that the government and the President Qayyum was under threat, the Air Force launched its aircraft along with the military officers and men from the parachute regiments, flew them across 600 kilometers and landed there and took over, moved away, sort of cleared out the threat and freed the country. And this was something which was sort of a record of sorts, because within 9 hours from the time the message came, this whole issue was resolved, and that is amazing. And then came in 2019, when in Balakot for the first time, air power was used to cross international boundary to show our adversary that any act of terror on our soil will not be tolerated. So the military power was used against a non-military target in peacetime inside somebody else's territory. And that is a classic case of political signaling. And this is something which is unique to our country, and very few countries have done that. Now comes to the peacetime, the non-kinetic or the soft power aspects of air power. Now we have something called humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, which the Air Force plays a major role. So right from the tsunami of 2004, US Katrina, the hurricane, Philippines in 2013, Maldives supplying water in 2014, Op Rahat, where we Air Force aircraft, transport aircraft went and pulled out Indians who were stuck in Yemen, evacuated them. Op Maitri, where we rushed to the rescue of Nepal when the earthquake took place in 2015. Then Op Sankat Mochan, where Indian nationals were evacuated from South Sudan from 2016 by our IL-76 aircraft. Each and every rescue and relief operation in our country, that is due to cyclone, floods, and ranging from Andhra Pradesh, Kashmir, Uttarakhand, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, the IAF has played a huge role, because they are called the first responders, because of the sheer fact that the aircraft can get airborne swiftly and reach the point of where the disaster has struck. And this makes it an effective first responder. And the IAF has played an immense role in this. And very interestingly, uh, in the recent COVID crisis, the Air Force also played a role which not many people are aware. It was a very active part of this vaccine matrix, flying vaccines to 97 countries, then transportation of vaccine, medical equipment, PPE kits, oxygen from all countries. It was all done by air, by the Indian Air Force and Air India. So this is one of the important roles which the Air Force plays. Some of the other applications which the Air Force takes an active part is in aiding civil administration in peacetime, which could range from airlifting of supplies, logistic supplies, and administrative support to remote areas of our country where the roads are not there, or in adverse weather conditions. Places like Leh, Ladakh, where supplies and people are moved in and out by air during winters, and in the Northeast, where food, other logistical supplies and administrative support, road building equipment, all that heavy duty equipment like JCBs, road repairing, road building equipment, they're all airlifted across the dense jungles to areas where they can, which are very difficult to reach by road, by air. And they also play a very important role in anti-Naxal or left-wing extremist operations of the country in supporting the civilian armed forces in these duties. Then you're all aware that we are a huge democracy, as I mentioned earlier, and we have some 90 million voters in this country. And to my last, I think, reading, we have something like 2,700 plus or almost 2,800 political parties. So the elections is a huge exercise of democracy, which is amazing. Representation of India's democracy, and it is a model which the election model which we follow, the electronic voting machines. This whole system is something which the world over looks up to India, and many countries have sought our help in. So the Air Force plays a huge role in taking and moving election officials, voting equipment to far reaches of the country, which again can't be reached by road easily. Apart from that, movement of VIPs, like from the president to prime minister, chief ministers, moving them through the state, going abroad to other countries. It's all done by the Indian Air Force. One interesting nugget, I don't know if you're all aware, when the demonetization took place, the Indian Air Force was also tasked to carry currencies to different parts of the country. So the Indian Air Force aircraft were actually loaded with huge bundles of newly printed currency and distributed all over the country. Then another role which is important and very, very important, and which is played throughout the year, and especially in adverse weather conditions, is search and rescue by air from the mountains and flood afflicted areas. So the IAF has using its transport helicopters in extreme locations, and have rescued people from all kinds of situations, whether they're mountaineers and skiers stuck in high altitude mountains who have been cut off or who have got stuck, or people who need urgently moved for medical emergencies from the mountainous areas or remote areas to hospitals in the plains or in other areas. Then even firefighting, when we have forest fires, helicopters have been used to drop water over these fires. So this is a very interesting role which is played not so much in large quantities, but yes, it does play a very active role in this. And then we have air shows and displays in India and internationally, which showcases our air forces and the nation's capability to the world. So this has been as far as India is concerned. When it comes to the world over, there are other examples where we have taken part in air exercises with all of the major air forces in the world: the United States, UK, France, Russia, Australia, Japan, UAE, Singapore. That's a huge long list. And we have also taken part in major exercises where our Indian Army and Indian Navy takes part with other armies and the navies of the world. And the Air Force also plays a very active role in supporting foreign policy and military diplomacy in the different countries, and especially in the Southeast Asian region. And I also mentioned the role which we play in supporting the UN Charter whenever the Indian missions are sent abroad. So you find that the Air Force has actually a huge role which it plays in peacetime. And there are some roles which are purely specific to the Indian Air Force. There are many roles which are the Air Force combined with other services jointly together take part actively. But the firm and most important role which remains is preserving and protecting our democracy and democratic ideals. And this is something which the Indian Air Force and the military armed forces remain firmly committed to. With that, I think I'll finish here and give the other speakers a fair shot at their time. Thank you very much.
धन्यवाद। धन्यवाद एयर मार्शल दीप्तेंदु चौधरी जी। आपने वायुसेना शांति के समय में और युद्ध के समय में किस प्रकार से अपने कर्तव्य पर अडिग रहती है, आपने अपने विचार हमारे सामने हमारे साथ साझा किए और निश्चित रूप से हमारी छात्राओं को एक बहुत बड़ा विस्तार से और आपकी सेवाओं के बारे में और अधिक जानकारी मिली। मैं अब आमंत्रित करती हूँ हमारे अगले वक्ता मेजर जनरल डॉक्टर विपिन बख्शी, रिटायर्ड एवीएसएम वीएसएम जी को, कि वे हमारी छात्राओं से और उपस्थित हमारी जो टीचिंग फैकल्टी है उनके साथ अपना वक्तव्य साझा करें।
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Sandhya. Thank you, Professor Swati, the principal, for having invited me here and for laying the ground in your opening remarks in a very deep manner. In fact, you have covered so many things which I had wanted to speak. I'd also like to thank Dr. Shilpa Chaudhary, Dr. Debahuti, the NCC caretaker, all the organizers, the staff, and a special mention to the NCC cadets. I have spoken to the NCC cadets earlier about a year back, and some of the names I'm finding are very familiar. And all the other students and all the participants. So India as a democratic republic, we are all aware this incident is connected to Republic Day and the importance of Republic Day. We are generally aware, particularly those of us who have spent time living in the NCR. However, a little removed from the NCR, among the younger generation particularly, the awareness is not so high. A recent TV program I was seeing, it focused on random answers to the question about Republic Day at some cities, and obviously the worst or the most comical answers were being screened. So just suffice it to say that there were some who had no knowledge much beyond to say it's a holiday, we celebrate it, and yeah, there's a parade in Delhi. So that's all that people knew about the Republic Day. So as we are all aware of the importance of it and the adoption of our constitution. Those of us who have worn the uniform, who've been made aware of it through our education, have served in the military or in the NCC, or just living in Delhi, we are fortunate to be better informed about it. So, and Air Marshal Chaudhary have thrown light on the larger issues of employment of armed forces as an instrument of state power, and also something about the regional context. So I'll just touch upon a few more things from my personal experience and my personal viewpoint. Firstly, we are blessed to be born into this great republic, which has a firm constitution. It determines how the power of people is to be translated into governance. I will touch upon the preamble of the constitution also at the end. Our democracy has been described in a recent talk just about a week back at our institute by a leading person as not just the biggest democracy, but the tallest in the world. And I think Air Marshal Chaudhary also mentioned something in this regard. Secondly, we are more fortunate than many. Just look around us, as the principal also said, but I will go a little beyond. The Chinese people do not have an army. Some of you may know, some of you may not know. The People's Liberation Army, which we face on the northern border, does not belong to the country or the people. It belongs to the political party which happens to be in power, the CCP. The implications of this can be well imagined. All of you are students. Just like that, there are many nations in the world where the army does not serve the people. It answers to kings or dictators. The implications you can well understand. Not so with us. We are an army of the nation. We are drawn from the people. We defend the nation as well as protect the constitution. So you would see in some military stations, if you go, a quote which says, I rise from your faith in my ability to protect you. We are drawn from you. We draw strength from your faith in us. Our Indian military, as mentioned by two previous speakers, is deeply rooted in the democratic traditions and has a very strong apolitical character. I'd like to go, as mentioned in my profile, I have served in Angola as a UN peacekeeper. I'd just like to talk a little bit about that, throw some perspective at you. That was a war-torn nation when I went there. There was a West-backed rebel force called the UNITA, and there was a communist-backed government controlling the other. The nation was divided into pockets of opposing sides, and we were monitoring the ceasefire, which happened to have been signed in 1992, 17 years after the independence of that nation. And the independence of Angola was only 1975. And even 17 years later, there was a civil war on. We were also trying to monitor the ceasefire. We were trying to negotiate an end to the civil war by mutual consent. As a part of the negotiations, I was dealing with two colonels on opposite sides. And it struck me that they had the same surname. And I happened to ask. They were fighting on opposite sides, born and brought up in the same house. This is the kind of thing, I have seen. There was no established form of governance. Hardly any schools were running. Inflation was to the tune of 200%. I held in of 1 lakh kwanzas, 5 zeros behind the one. And can you believe it? I could not buy a matchbox with that note. I needed 5 such notes to buy a matchbox. So that was the kind of inflation which they had. Their civil war continued even after we left in 2002, and they could not get any kind of a stable democracy till 2010. And from 2010, they have a new constitution, and now they're transiting to a more stable democracy. Now, next about some more experiences all through our military service. We have contributed not only to upholding the democracy and the national issues on a larger basis, but particularly on Republic Day, we have contributed to the celebrations. And typically in some of my appointments, I would have had to do a flag hoisting twice, once in my own station and once in the school which we were running. And as I was mentioning that I will talk a little bit about the preamble. So I would like to now show you something about the preamble to the Constitution. Okay, so I hope you can see this. So the preamble states that we, the people of India, have resolved to form the Republic, as mentioned, and secure to its citizens. Please note the words secure to the citizens, not only justice, liberty, equality, fraternity, but also the unity and integrity of the nation. Now, all of us understand very well that the armed forces have to safeguard the unity and integrity of the nation. But if you look at the first part, justice, liberty, equality, fraternity are equally important. And it has to be done by the instruments of the state. And who's going to do it? So it's not only the armed forces who handle all these issues. As what M. Chaudhary also said about the comprehensive national power. So our political leaders, our government officers, our armed forces, and the armed police forces together fulfill the role specified, so that you get not only justice, liberty, equality, fraternity, but also unity and integrity of the nation. So it's an all-of-nation approach which should be adopted. And I assure you, you may rest easy, because those who are mandated to provide the security are standing firm on land, sea, and air. So with that, I'd like to end this talk. and long live our great nation. Thank you and Jai Hind.
धन्यवाद मेजर जनरल डॉक्टर विपिन बख्शी। और जैसा आपने कहा, निश्चित तौर से हम सभी अपने आप में बहुत सुरक्षित अनुभव करते हैं जब तक हमारे सशस्त्र बल, जैसे आपने कहा, बहुत दृढ़ता से खड़े हैं और हम सभी का विश्वास आप में पूरी गहनता के साथ है। धन्यवाद आपका। मैं अब आमंत्रित करती हूँ कमांडर अभिजीत सिन्हा को उनके वक्तव्य के लिए। कमांडर अभिजीत सिन्हा, आप अपने विचार हमारे साथ शेयर करें।
Thank you, Professor Garg. Thank you, Principal Ma'am, Dr. Swati Pal, for having me here. Being attached to this college for a long period of time, I've got a special place for all the students of this college and the college itself. Like my esteemed seniors, Air Marshal Chaudhary and Major General Bakshi already explained to you all people as to the in terms of what armed forces represent and adds to the democracy of our country. I would like to touch upon a little applications part of the same thing, how we get in the armed forces. It's across the board for all the three services. It happens almost commonly. And primarily why I'm saying this is because I see a lot of young students and cadets of NCC here. So with the present times, it becomes very relevant. As Air Marshal Chaudhary mentioned that in armed forces, we do not believe in caste, creed, religion. We from the armed forces also comes from the same state of the society that we live in. But it's through various subtle training over in the initial years that we get used to this fact that these become irrelevant when we talk about in front of the nation. I'll give you a simple example. When we joined the academy in the very initially, all of us, all cadets are issued with white typical enamel mugs for which is used for your morning tea, you use it for your shaving, you use it for your bathing, you use it for all other things. Now, these, even though all of us write our names on it, but over the usage, you just do not know. So one lands up having tea from a mug which is being used for all other things by somebody else at times. So slowly, even though I had postmates who had come from typical traditional family, not necessarily looking down upon other castes or creed, but it's just the traditions that they were born in, that I can't have a jutha, or I can't have somebody else touching, a vegetarian touching my mug or a non-vegetarian touching my mug, kind of a scenario. Over a period of that 2 to 3 years that you're spending in your academy and you go this, it is like a battle inoculation in a way. You start believing more, and okay, he's my squadron type, or he's my course mate, he's my regiment type, he's my squadron unit type. So this slowly starts taking precedence over the years, over your caste, creed, religion, what you come from. This is just one of the examples. It's a battle inoculation for you, because when a soldier, he gets injured, he does not care as which blood is coming into him to save him. When he is facing an enemy, he is not worried about the caste or creed or the religion of the person who is standing right behind him, who might be able to save him. Only thing which he goes by is the regimental insignia in case of the army, and similar kind of formation signals for the Air Force and the Navy. So these are the ways which I feel everywhere, if we start using and trading, we find that it comes a habit that your nation comes before your caste, creed, religion, or anything. I'll give you another example of life which has happened in 2018. some of you may be remembering, there was a massive floods in Kerala in 2018, and there was a whole lot. The weather was pathetically bad, and there were a lot of SOS calls coming from everywhere. There was one area near Alapura where a family had gathered on a rooftop, and because of the flood, where there was a pregnant lady in a very advanced stage of advanced stage and needed urgent medical attention. The weather was so bad. There was one decision which was taken in that a naval aircraft was flown in with we call something as an aircrew divers, who are basically either slithering down from the aircraft to rescue people at sea or something. So there was one Captain Raj Kumar who flew that aircraft in that bad weather, came to on top of that building. Now this lady was a Christian lady praying to her God as to how he save him. The aircrew diver was Petty Officer Asif, who slithered down from top, each one of them praying their own God, but the gods didn't care as to who came. The only thing which remained at that particular time was to rescue that lady and take her to a hospital. This is an example where you see that in need, in dire needs, in distress, people forget what a religion is or what a caste or creed is. It has been through various training, has been formulated within the armed forces as to go ahead and do it. If you could go back to our history, you will find in a whole lot of examples. You will find an example of the army. I having heard it from my own father, who was in the army. The first unit which was landed in Srinagar in 1947 was, I think, first Sikh, and that first Sikh regiment, it was commanded by a Muslim officer, and it's because of their value, the way they fought and safeguarded. Today we have the Jammu and Kashmir in the map of India. Otherwise, probably would have lost it. So we see that the in the armed forces, what we do not have a mandir, masjid, or a church as such. We all have something which we call as a sarvadharm sthal. Everybody prays everywhere. Like I mentioned, that Muslim commanding officer of a Sikh unit, he is not only leading him into the troops into the battle, in the exercises, he also leads the prayers in the Gurdwara of the unit, because primarily so as such, the main idea of a religion or a caste or a creed in the armed forces have been to just to put them together, but what comes first is the nation, the safety of his nation, and thus the democracy of that country. If we look around us, our country, you will find a whole lot of countries where the armed forces and the civilian balance had gone awry, and they have landed up with the dictators, they have landed up with the military regime, and like Major General Bakshi and Marshal Chaudhary mentioned of various times in various other countries, have gone through phase. Despite the fact that we are such a huge population, the balance has kept together for two primary reasons. One, a well-drafted and well-thought-out constitution, and the constitution has been made as the main book or the main so-called religion of the armed forces. That is where one of the ways that they have helped the democracy. That's what I feel. As we talk, kids, you would you should remember, in fact, is that as we are talking now, we have got soldiers probably standing right from Kanyakumari to right up to Kargil in the north, from the northeast jungles to the deserts of the west. Everywhere we have the soldiers who are guarding and looking at us. So we must think of one small young captain who is in Siachen facing already two fronts, one of the enemy and one of the harsh weather that they face there. If within us as a citizens of the country, we do not get within us create differences, create other issues, and put up a third front for that young boy to also face that of religious issues, religious differences, and allow the enemy to utilize those differences for their own benefit. So that's one of the things that we always, I always felt that in a democracy, the idea till the time we value the constitution, we value the nation before anything else, whether it is religion, caste, or creed, we will always have a very strong and a vibrant democracy intact in our country, whatever comes. Thank you so much. God bless you all.
धन्यवाद कमांडर सिन्हा। और निश्चित तौर से राष्ट्र किसी भी धर्म संप्रदाय से ऊपर है। कहा भी गया है कि माँ और मातृभूमि इनका कोई विकल्प नहीं होता, और हम एकमात्र ऐसा देश है जहां हम अपने देश के साथ माँ का संबोधन जोड़ते हैं। भारत माँ जब हम कहते हैं तो निश्चित तौर से उस मातृभूमि का कोई विकल्प नहीं है, कोई भी शक्ति, कोई भी संप्रदाय उससे ऊंचा नहीं है। आपके इस वक्तव्य के लिए मैं आभार व्यक्त करती हूँ। और अब मैं आमंत्रित करती हूँ प्रोफेसर स्वाति पाल, हमारी प्राचार्य को प्रश्नोत्तर सत्र के लिए। निश्चित तौर से हमारी छात्राओं के मन में कुछ जिज्ञासाएं होंगी और हमारे आमंत्रित वक्ता उनका उत्तर देंगे। प्रोफेसर पाल।
Thank you so much, Professor Garg. At the outset, of course, before I begin asking the questions, I must thank and congratulate our esteemed speakers for their very sensitive, I would say partly emotional, partly professional presentations. It was not only informative, but it was very heartwarming to listen to all of you. I'm still waiting for people to write to me in the chat box, but because we had circulated a Google form for people to register themselves, we have received some questions there, and I will select a couple of those. We've received quite a few actually through the Google forms already. So one of the questions that, and any one of you could take it or all of you could take the question as you so desire. So one of the questions that have been asked is, can we say that after the removal of Article 370, it is much easier for the armed forces to function better in Kashmir? This is from a student. Any one of you, I'll repeat the question. Can we say that after the removal of Article 370, it is much easier for the armed forces to function better in Kashmir? So any one of you who'd like to take that?
I'll just pop in just for, I'm sure Bipin Bakshi, who's spent so much of time in Srinagar, will have a clearer perspective. I would think that is more of a political and an administrative issue, which will facilitate growth and development in the state. I think the armed forces and the military, they continue to play their role in that place, and I don't think the removal of this has made it any easier or any more difficult for them. That's just my short view of this.
Yeah, I'll support what the Marshal said. The way we operate and the kind of challenges we face, yes, of course, there is an, because it is no longer a state. It has become a UT. To that extent, I will say from my personal experience that since you had a politically and a democratically elected government in place earlier, whichever politician was in power, if he wants to get re-elected, he would have to continue to try and, make some utterances and try and move the state in a particular direction, which may not have been in tune with the entire national priorities. Those kind of, disruptive activities which some of the politicians were forced to undertake just to stay in power have waned to an extent. So it's an indirect thing the way the crowds behave, the amount of civil unrest, which may or may not have had any real basis, it would indirectly impact our operations. Now, with that compulsion of the issue gone, and the administration more firmly in the saddle, I would say, and the administration which is running the state there in a better position to take more significant decisions, which, as Air Marshal said, are conducive to the development of the state, the prosperity of the people, the commercial issues, economic issues, have become more easy to handle. There will be an indirect effect that ultimately the terrorism will come down and ultimately our operations will get facilitated. But it's not an immediate and a direct correlation. I hope I've answered the question.
Sure. Commander Sinha, would you like to say something on this, or shall I move on to the next question? You need to unmute. Yes.
No, please go ahead.
Right.
Sir has already explained.
Right. So there are two questions which have come back to me on the chat box from the students. One is the voice of a skeptic, and I will, so I'm finding it a little amusing because the skeptical person says, indeed, armed forces is politically neutral, but changing parties and politics in the name of caste, race, and creed does exist. And this might have or may or will affect the functions of the armed forces. What are your views on this? This is a rather dangerous question, I would say, but nonetheless, would you like to take it? Because this is, of course, coming from a particular point of view, a particular understanding that no, everything is not as rosy as you all have put forward to us. There are stories we get to see in newspapers and so on. I understand where this question is coming from in the mind of the student. So would you like to speak about it?
Yeah, quick couple of points on this. That's the beauty of a democratic republic. This place for everybody, skeptics included. And everybody's welcome. It's everybody's nation. It's everybody's land. And everyone has a point of view, and there's space for this point of view, and that is what the beauty of this democracy is about. And that's something we should be terribly proud of when we hit 75 years today. And I don't think there is any nation which is a perfect nation. Every nation, even the most developed ones, and we have seen it during the COVID crisis, it just brought out the best and the worst in those countries and in the world over. So my short answer to this is simply that I don't think there should be any worries on this account. It's a democracy in progress. It's a nation which is on the move, which is on the rise, which will do exceeding well. And I'm very sure that we at some point will become a great power. And that is the way we are going because of the immense economic progress that we have made and the resilience that we have shown. And we have set examples to the world, which I think we should be very, very proud of. And yes, other aspect I can understand where he or she, the skeptic, is probably coming from, is that you do watch national television today, you do come away with a terrible perspective of this nation, because it seems only bad news sells. And that is what I think TRP ratings are all about. And that is something which is capitalized on by a lot of other vested interests and vested nations and vested parties. And so I don't think there's any fear of that. But what the skeptic, I mean, since you mentioned the word skeptic, but I must say that there is so much of good happening in this nation, which doesn't hit the headlines. And if just one peels off the upper layer and looks into the other aspects, you'll realize that we truly are an amazing nation. Thank you.
Thank you. General Bakshi?
Yeah, I'd like to add a bit. I think we should draw a clear distinction between the armed forces and their activities while they are in service and after they have left the service. A retired army officer, military officer all over the world, has been seen to join politics. Many of the presidents of USA have been ex-army. Definitely many senior politicians in USA have been ex-army. there's an impression about changing of parties or so, whatever they do after retirement is to further the political career which he or she may have chosen after leaving uniform. It has no impact whatsoever on the serving armed forces fraternity. I think we can rest assured on it, and it is two distinct things. Thank you.
That was a very relevant point. Commander Sinha?
I'll just add to what General Bakshi sir just mentioned. How it is absolutely irrelevant while in the service, and it's not just those who in the service in uniform, even outside the uniform. If you all recollect 26/11 attack in Mumbai attack, when the NSG and the Marcos went in, I don't think any one of them at that time bothered as to neither did they bother about those who they are rescuing are of what caste, creed, or what religion. Neither those who were being rescued were bothered about the person, NSG guards, caste, creed, or religion that he is coming in. So what I primarily wanted to say, and Bakshi sir has already explained very clearly, that those while in uniform, politics is not it's a no for them. Not only by what is rules and regulations are laid out, it's also by default settings that goes over the years of your training and when you are in the uniform itself.
Right, thank you. So a whole lot of questions have now suddenly started coming up to me in the chat box. I will, because we are in the midst of military people who are extremely punctual, who are known for keeping to their timings. So I will dare to take, with your permission, of course, I will dare to take another 5-6 minutes more and ask just 2 more questions. One question, of course, I will answer it myself, my dear child. You have said, Cadet Manisha, that armed forces doesn't have creed and religious bias. What about gender roles, females and males, equal participation and opportunities? My own family, we have 3 ladies who were in the army, 2 retired as major generals, 1 is a serving lieutenant colonel in the army. But yes, once again, I see the doubt and perhaps the fear, and maybe you might want to talk about it, because a lot of the students, a lot of people do believe that while the armed forces is giving opportunities to women, what about, how much of these opportunities are really to be taken? I don't know how to use what word to use, but what are the ways in which we make the women comfortable, in the sense that while on the one hand we are talking about gender parity, and there should be gender parity in terms of inclusiveness within the armed forces, but nonetheless the fact exists that there are differences. So how do we balance the two? How do we manage gender parity with a respect for the fact that we are taking in women to the armed forces and they need to be treated in a particular way? Because once again, a lot of media representation about this is a little, iffy.
I'll just take a couple of points in this. We've had women in Air Force for a very long time. And I'll give you a small example. And I was commanding a frontline station in the Western sector. And I had a lot of lady officers under me. And I'll simply put it, I was extremely fair and just in that I was tough with everybody. And so this is because it's a very simple equation out there, especially in the Air Force, and I'm sure it's the same in the Army and the Navy. It's the profession which matters. Gender bias is got nothing to do with the armed forces. It is an issue of patriarchal mindsets. And very interestingly, I met a lot of these girls later who had become fairly senior officers, who have been commanders and group captains. And one day I met about 4 or 5 of them in one social event, and they all sort of saw me after a long time and all came around. So by then and they were the first lot who had sort of joined the armed forces, and it was very they were sort of, from a perspective, they were breaking into a man's world. And I found them outstanding in the profession. And very interestingly, so when these girls met me later, so I asked them this question, this is, how did you handle me? I mean, I was from what everybody tells me, I was a very tough customer. He says, sir, the most amazing part about you is that you never treated us any different. And that was something is what the armed forces is all about, because it's about profession which matters. And there's tremendous respect. In fact, in the services, we've always had this. We always treated ladies with a huge amount of deference and respect. So it is a culturally and a socially and very ingrained in the military ethos, in the way we deal with women and give them respect. So I don't think it's something. It's a wonderful career. It's a wonderful profession, and I think all the girls who have an opportunity to join the services tomorrow do so happily and very proudly, because the nation needs you as well.
General Bakshi.
Yeah, I'll echo the sentiments which he has said. In fact, I was in the training wing of our corps, and I was training these officers, as a mix of officers and women. And, things have changed. In the early days, there may have been some flutter. And I would say in the early days, the senior officers particularly did not know how to handle this entry. They would not know that she should be treated as a lady or as an officer. My youngsters, whenever I would be passing orders on something, I say, okay, the lady officers will do this and all of you will go here. So one of them got up and said, sir, this is gender bias. I said, what happened? So these people, you give them a lot of this thing, lift, and you say lady officer and all that. Or humko to aap kuch nahi bolte ho. Then I realized, and like what Dipendra was saying, that over a period of time, in all the three services, we have realized that we do not need to treat them with kid gloves. They are equally capable. They will perform equally well. At the same time, I would like to partially differ from the Air Force issues, because in the Air Force, it's the machine and the pilot and a lot of individual thing. In the Navy and the Army, they have to rub shoulders a lot in close confines with men. So whenever that is happening, whenever there are constraints of space and issues of that nature, we are sensitive. We are overly sensitive. And I would look at it as it's my daughter. I should be concerned about her need. So when it comes to work and output and profession, we treat them equally. But where it needs some sensitive handling, we do it. I think there should be no qualms on the issue at all. Thank you.
Madison.
Okay. I'll just explain a little bit from the Navy's perspective, because though Navy had taken in the lady officers in some of the branches very early, but we were probably one of the last ones to take them on board ships. Primarily, it's not so much of a gender bias as such. It is more of a logistics issue, like General Bakshi was mentioned, and more so in the Navy, because there is no option of doing a temporary shifting or mechanism of a certain resource that you want to do, the ladies to use or the men not to use. So in the beginning, there were these issues which were probably the primarily reason for the delay of the increase, but those are something which have been now addressed through the design changes of the later version of the ships. Many things have been rerouted, many decks have been designed in a way that it does not encroach in the privacy of the lady officers. I'll very frankly, I'll give you a simple example. in the ship that I have been on those days, that we had the washrooms which had, it's a long washroom with just a curtain bifurcating the washroom. That's it, just to save your weight and the space. And the men as well as the officers, everybody is using it. But the same place you will find it, like now, if we allow our lady officers to also come in, there are certain regulation wise, the logistics, usage timing, and everything had to be re-altered. That took some time for the Navy to get its organizations going. And as of now, the new ships which are coming, they are all getting posted on boards. It's happening. And again, like I had mentioned earlier, we are from the same strata of the society, the armed forces people. The problems that are there in the outside world will also be there in the armed forces. The way we are talking in terms of utilization of the resources or division. It's like the girls. It's a primarily a women's college, and tomorrow, if your principal is told that day after tomorrow onwards, 100 male students are supposed to join, she has to do some reorganization within the college. So it's likewise, nothing more than that that we do. And like Bakshi sir had already mentioned, that it took us a little time to come out our mindset of what the lady will be able to do and won't be able to do. It's just a matter of time, which is already out.
Thank you. Don't frighten me, Commander Sinha, because let me tell you that there was a time that women's colleges of Delhi University did not have male faculty, right? But in the last decade or so, this has been allowed. So we do have male faculty members now as part of the overall faculty. And yes, we have had to make space for them, and they are as assertive of their rights, though they are fewer in number, but they are as assertive of their rights as the women are. So yes, you're absolutely right about that. We will end with one last question, and I must ask it because it is from a very dear retired faculty member of our college, who is extremely, how would I put it? She's quite a soldier in her own way. That's Ms. Marjorie Fernandez from the Economics Department, who asks, considering that the armed forces reflect the underlying social trends, to what extent has the increasing polarization of society in recent times affected the functioning of the armed forces? It has partially been answered, but you might want to reflect on it. And this is our last question. Yes.
Again, very short answer to Ms. Fernandez's question is that I think that's one thing we really don't have to ever worry about. It's so firmly ingrained in us that whatever happens outside, and like as General Bakshi had mentioned, the true allegiance is not only to the Constitution, it's to the nation. It's a bigger thing. And I think it's very interesting that the army, like when you get into, even today, I think every regiment has a Sarvat Dharm Sthal, where all the prayers are, and so is the case in every Air Force and a naval station. We celebrate all religious festivals together. We celebrate all regional festivals together. And it doesn't matter who's celebrating it and what the background is and what religion is. And similarly, in some of the examples which Commodore Sinha brought out very aptly, that when you're outside serving the nation, it does not matter what caste, creed, religion, party, it just does not matter. What matters is that's a fellow Indian. And that is all that there is to it. Thank you.
General Bakshi?
Yeah, I will also agree. In fact, maybe if you ask this question to some of your senior NCC cadets who have done a few camps and have spent more than a year or two in the NCC, and what Commander Sinha also said, it has been ingrained in us. I mean, it's gone into our blood, and it's not going to get affected by what you see around us. we are too deeply rooted into a secular and a flat organization, and we give no credence to caste, creed, or religion. And I'm just trying to get the words that how irrelevant all of it is for us, because the way we are, the way we have trained, brought up, and the more you have trained hard together, the more you cling to each other. It doesn't matter which religion my buddy is, but the kind of difficult times I have spent at minus 35 degrees in Dras walking with my troops. Minus 35 degrees is something you can't even imagine. From minus 5 to minus 20, I could not make the difference. But from minus 20 to minus 30, 35, I could feel the difference. And having gone through a very different kind of training, a very different kind of life, we really are not affected by all these things. So maybe I've not been able to explain it fully.
No, perfectly explained. And when you say minus 35, I'm suddenly feeling warmer, though it's such a cold and freezing day, I'm suddenly feeling warmer now. Commander Sinha, would you like to add?
Yes, I'd like to explain one thing to Mrs. Fernandez. Sometimes I feel a little bit of a mixture, people, primarily the media and in general public, does of retired soldiers with the serving soldiers. The one big difference is serving soldiers are, there are certain fundamental rights which are curtailed by nature, which comes back to them when they are out of the uniform. So it is, you will not find the polarized statements coming off from people who are in their uniform. What I mean is, in their uniform is the presently serving ones. It is only when they become part and parcel of our general society as a civil retired officer, which comes back with his all basic fundamental rights of exercising the freedom of speech, in exercising your polarized or whatever you want to say, and which has got multiplied because of the so-called social media which has come up now for instant fame or so and so forth. So that is why people, when you hear of most of these polarized views, if coming from armed forces, they will be are the ones who are probably is already left the services, not in uniform. While still in uniform, your psyche is made such, you become so trained that you do not get affected by this, and you're only focused on your nation, constitution, and president.
Thank you, Commander Sinha. Yes, Emma.
No, I'm absolutely spot on what Abhijit mentioned. I just want to say just one thing, that, and I think there was a mention of this, that armed forces are also a reflection of this nation. And it's a cross section. You will always find, and like you said, when people go outside, so there will be that odd person who probably gets swayed because of different reasons or different circumstances, who makes those statements. But by and large, I can say with full faith and assurance that probably 99.9% of our ex-service and the veterans who have served and rubbed shoulders together. In fact, very simply, last evening, I'm retired. I had two serving officers who had come down, and one ex-serving officer. One was a Parsi, one was a Christian, and two were Hindus. It just doesn't matter. So I think that those aberrations will always be there. It's a democracy. People are free to air their views, but at no stage sort of a widespread spreading of this in social media should be seen as an actual trend.
Yes. Absolutely. I really support and endorse what you all just said. And the fact is, I think, Commander Sinha, I think the worry for most people is that, you may leave the armed forces, you may leave your uniform, but the armed forces never really leaves you, So the way you've been trained while serving in the armed forces, I think a lot of that remains with you. And I would like to believe that, as Air Marshal Chaudhary said, that even after becoming a retired person, I would like to believe that armed forces personnel are a little more perhaps open-minded, despite whatever ideological moorings they may have. I want to just add one thing to whatever you all said, that, you know, one of the great things about being a member of an armed forces family. I'm not an armed forces person in that I've not served in the armed forces, but I've been a member, and a very, I should say, I'm crowded and surrounded by armed forces people. And one of the great advantages, on a lighter note, is the wonderful cuisine that my mother, you know, she learned. So from her friends who were practicing Islam, and I was in Lucknow for a good number of years, and our next door neighbor, the Sharifs, my mother learned her entire Mughlai cooking from her, and so on and so forth. You know, so she had Christian friends who went the whole way in teaching her things that we relate mostly to English or continental food. So that was one thing. And the other thing that I would like to narrate as a personal anecdote is the fact that, you know, my mother once caught me. We had gone into the temple and we were praying, and there was this shivling. And I just did this, you know, automatically, I just did this. I made the sign of the cross. That was, of course, partially my schooling in a Christian school, but also because in the forces, really there is such a blurring of any kind of barrier that separates people. I have personally enjoyed that. So thank you very, very much, all three of you, for your absolutely engrossing presentations and for this very candid and beautiful question answer session that we had. Thank you so much. I'll hand over to Professor Sandhya Garg for a more formal vote of thanks. Thank you, audience, also.
Thank you so much, Professor Park. आज के इस प्रश्नोत्तर सत्र में छात्राओं को अपने उत्तर मिले, उसके अतिरिक्त भी हमारे सम्मानित वक्ताओं में मैं प्रारंभ करूंगी एयर मार्शल दीप्तेंद्र चौधरी जी से। उन्होंने अपने वक्तव्य में हमें ये बताया कि किस प्रकार से विभिन्न धर्म और संप्रदायों के बावजूद भी हमारा देश एक है और सशस्त्र बल भारतीय लोकतंत्र के अनुरूप देश की भौगोलिक सीमा और जन की सुरक्षा के लिए प्रतिबद्ध है। मेजर बख्शी ने अपना वक्तव्य प्रारंभ किया युवा पीढ़ी को ये संदेश देते हुए कि कल का जो दिन है वो एक सामान्य अवकाश का दिन नहीं है, वो हमारे लिए एक स्मरण दिवस भी होना चाहिए कि यह स्वतंत्रता हमने किस प्रकार से कितने बलिदानों के बाद पाई है और हमें इसकी सुरक्षा करनी है। विभिन्न देशों के उदाहरण देते हुए उन्होंने भारत के लोकतंत्र के स्वरूप की भी व्याख्या की। कमांडर सिन्हा ने सशस्त्र सेना को ज्वाइन करते हुए आरंभ में अपने पारिवारिक और परंपरागत मूल्यों की दुविधा से संघर्ष जो मन में होता है और फिर शीघ्र ही एक राष्ट्र की जो भावना आती है, उसके लिए उन्होंने छात्राओं को प्रेरित किया कि प्रारंभ में कुछ दुविधा आए भी इन संगठनों को ज्वाइन करने में, सशस्त्र सेना को ज्वाइन करने के लिए, लेकिन फिर अपने आप ही देश सर्वोपरि है ये भाव प्रत्येक सैनिक के मन में जाग जाता है। आप सभी हमारे देश का गौरव हैं। आपका धन्यवाद शब्दों में करना कठिन है। मैं तो ये कहूंगी कि कोई भी सम्मान आपसे जुड़कर स्वयं सम्मानित हो जाता है। आपको अपने बीच पाकर हम सभी गौरवान्वित और सम्मानित अनुभव कर रहे हैं। हमारी प्राचार्य सेना की पृष्ठभूमि से ही संबंधित हैं। उनका समर्पण, कर्मनिष्ठा, अनुशासन जहां एक ओर प्रशंसनीय है, वहां दूसरी ओर हमें भी कर्मठ बनने की प्रेरणा देते हैं। मैं इसके अतिरिक्त आज के जो कार्यक्रम के आयोजक हैं, हमारी IQAC कोऑर्डिनेटर डॉक्टर शिल्पा चौधरी, IQAC मेंबर मिस्टर दीपक मनचंदा, हमारी NCC इंचार्ज डॉक्टर देवाहुति ब्रह्मचारी, हमारे स्टाफ एडवाइजर्स प्रोफेसर अनुपमा राजपूत, डॉक्टर खुर्शीद, डॉक्टर देबा और मिस शिल्पा मग्गो, हमारी टेक्निकल टीम मिस्टर सुरेंद्र और मिस्टर मनोज, तथा हमारी स्टूडेंट टीम वन्या, चंद्रिका, ताशवी, रितिका, रश्मि और सौम्या को भी हृदय से धन्यवाद देती हूँ। और दो पंक्तियां जरूर कहूंगी, मैं साहित्य की छात्रा हूँ तो रह नहीं पाती। क्षमा क्षोभती उस भुजंग को जिसके पास गरल हो, उसे क्या जो दंतहीन विषहीन सरल हो। तो हमारे सशस्त्र बल बताते हैं कि हमारे पास तुम्हें नाश करने के लिए पर्याप्त सामर्थ्य है, लेकिन हमारे मन में शांति, सौहार्द और क्षमा का भाव है। तो हमारी शक्ति और हमारी क्षमा को एक तराजू पे कभी भी मत तोल कर देखिए। धन्यवाद आप सभी का, हृदय से धन्यवाद। और कल के गणतंत्र दिवस के लिए आप सभी को हार्दिक शुभकामनाएं। जय हिंद।
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Happy Republic Day. But we have one last thing to fulfill.
I request everybody to please stand up and join us for the national anthem.
जन गण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता। पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा। विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा। तव शुभ नामे जागे, तव शुभ आशीष मांगे। गाहे तव जय गाथा, जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता। जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे।
Thank you, everyone, and Jai Hind. Once again, warm wishes for the Republic Day for tomorrow. Thank you so much, Air Marshal Chaudhary, Major General Bakshi, Commander Sinha. It was really a fantastic session. I think everybody really found it meaningful. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We could stop the recording and the live streaming now. The live